Coming to you from beautiful Northwest Montana, it's time for the Mary Todd Show. And here's your host, Mary Todd.
Hi, today you are witnessing history in the making. This is the premiere of the Mary Todd Show. I am so thrilled to be here with my co-host, Toni Sward. Not only is she my co-host, she is my dear friend.
Thank you, Mary. I'm so happy to be here. We're here to bring you today. We're going to give you some news. We're going to give you some human interest stories. And not only that, but life lessons that you can trust.
Trust is the operative word. You know, I was at church on Sunday. We were there together with my husband, Rick, and he gave me a word from the Lord, actually in the middle of the service. And he said, I think this is for your podcast. And I'm just going to start it with that. It's in John, and it's found in chapter 18 when Jesus is being confronted by Pilate. And he said, in fact, for this reason I was born, and for this reason I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. This is a show that we not only want to tell the truth, but we want it to be life-changing. I want my life changed. How about you? Because
Absolutely.
Today, what we do today determines our tomorrows, right, Toni?
So true. In fact, speaking of today, we are talking about January 6th. January 6th is the 4-year anniversary of what took place on our Capitol building just 4 short years ago. What they were calling the deadliest insurrection. Mm-hmm. But all eyes today seem to be on Washington, D.C. for the presidential confirmation nomination. Not talking about what's going on, what had happened those 4 years ago. However, the DOJ is still arresting people. They're still costing taxpayers thousands of dollars. Not only that, but it's wasting our money, but it's also upending families, costing them money to defend themselves, and it's hurting their reputations of many, many patriots. And it's such a shame. What the real question is at this point, Mary, and I keep asking it over and over, is what really took place at our nation's capital that day? There are too many questions, and the media is not telling us the answers. To what?
The media is not telling us answers?
They're holding back the full story.
Are they not telling the truth?
They're not telling the truth. I'm sorry to say. We must be the voice of truth to those who are being silenced and slandered, and those are the J6ers who are still held in jail. Our goal is to educate people for what is happening and how the government is weaponizing themselves against American patriots, which is absurd. They should not be doing that. Media outlets continue to call what happened on January 6th a deadly insurrection, likening it to what took place on 9/11 and at Pearl Harbor, which truly were the worst times, deadly attacks on our country.
Well, as you know, Toni, I was there with my husband and my sons and my nephews on January 6th. And it did not appear to be an insurrection at all to me. It appeared more like a church service. In fact, I have a very blurry clip. We can just show that for a minute just to show what I saw that day. Every day, more and more evidence is coming out that this was not an insurrection, rather a setup by the feds to take down Trump and his followers. And we have video clip after video clip showing the evidence. Pipe bombs have shown up that nobody seems to know who put them there or how they got there. And the things that we have seen really implicate our feds.
Sadly, that's exactly what's happening. And what we have found is there are so much that's still yet to come out. We have talked to people who are giving us more information, who want to share their story. But today, we get to hear from 3 individuals who have skin in the game, as you would so call it. Mary Sturgeon, Eureka McCoy, and a wife of a J6er, Carrie Hoffman.
So Eureka and Mary are moms of J6ers, and then Carrie is a wife of a J6er.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then not only that, we are blessed to have Dr. Roger Roots, who is a criminologist, he's a criminal defense lawyer, as well as a constitutional historian. And this man has spent 80 hours a week defending these people who are being unjustly accused.
Well, we're really thrilled to glean from Dr. Roots, and I'm sure some of the moms will have questions for him, and Carrie, the wife, will have questions for him, and he has a wealth of knowledge for us. There's one little fact that I wanted to tell you, that all these men, so Carrie's husband, Luke, and Eureka's son, Patrick, and then Mary's son, Isaac, are all in the same jail or prison together in Elkhorn. It's a federal prison in Elkhorn. So it's interesting that they're all together. And I think we'll start the show with Mary Sturgeon. Mary and I met in, I believe it's Helena, at a political event long before J6, and we connected. I really enjoyed her. And then this tragedy happened, and her son Isaac was arrested and is now serving time. Hi, Mary. I'm glad to have you on the show.
Hi, Mary.
No, not yet.
Mary didn't make it to the show yet.
Oh, Mary has not made it to the show yet. Okay, so then I'm going to go on to introduce Eureka. Eureka, we have not met personally, but Toni and I have gotten to talk to you on the phone and hear your story and what happened to your son, Patrick. We have a few pictures of Patrick and Mary, or Eureka, if you'd like to put those up. And Eureka, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome. Nice to talk to you again.
So would you just give us a brief overview of Patrick, what happened to him, what happened at the Capitol, and how he's doing now, and how it's affected you and your family?
Well, Patrick was 23 in 2021, so it was just his second election, and it was his second time being at a political event. He had gone to the November rally, and his father said, let's go January as well. And so they took off. He didn't tell me anything. I didn't know of any involvement until the FBI knocked at my door at dinner time about 10 days later.
So you didn't even know that he'd gone January 6th?
I knew he had gone. And when I asked him, he said, oh, it was very peaceful and everybody was good and nice and we all got along. And no, I was never in danger, Mom. He whitewashed it. And I think he didn't want to believe either that he had done wrong.
Yeah.
And so he was swatted at his dad's house while cooking dinner. And they came to my house and said my son had been arrested for January 6 charges, but they wouldn't tell me why. Not no specifics, which was really scary at the time because, the 18th of January 21, a lot of rumors were still circulating what happened. I thought, my God, he must have killed somebody that they, come and arrest my little boy, really. Anyways, so it was our first introduction to the justice system in America, which was quite an eye-opener. So he was arrested and then shoveled around multiple times.
Well, to your knowledge, what did happen at the Capitol with your son, Patrick, that day?
Well, there's lots of video coverage. He has one of those, he's shown everywhere. He participated, he's 23 and, he touched the barrier and he provoked. And then he sort of got funneled into that, what they call a West Tunnel, which is really just a manufactured overhang. And he had he was handed a riot shield and he held it up like you hold a riot shield. And then he got pushed and he ended up in the front row. And there was Officer Hodges in the doorframe. And he said, hey, that's not a good spot. And then he got pushed towards him and they collided and yeah.
Well, the evidence does show on the video that he's being pushed from behind. And there's really no place for him to go. And it was at that time, as we were looking at the video, that it shows Daniel's holding the screen Patrick, excuse me, holding the screen, and Daniel Hodges is kind of off to the side, but he is saying, and the way the media described it is, he was being crushed. And there was no way he was being crushed in that situation.
Well, especially, he's a Metro riot officer. There were two Patrick was accused of assaulting two of them. And the other guy said, I'm a riot officer. I know what I signed up for. I wasn't happy that day. They shouldn't have done this, but it's my job to deal with them. And Officer Hodges, like the other way that, he was scared to death and he didn't know what to do and he had bruises, he had an MRI, and I'm glad he's okay. How much worse would have been if something had happened to him. But it was not just my son, it was 50 people behind him pushing as well. But because, the narrative is nice, Patrick was deemed a poster child of this, what really shocked me one time, there was a riot or something in Brazil. And suddenly I saw my son's face there, and they had taken that clip and said, see, this is just like we had at the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, excuse me? It's not even the same country. It was just, yes.
So did Patrick ever even go into the Capitol?
No, he never went inside. He ended at that doorway. At the first, I guess they built this plywood tunnel, and then there are 2 sets of glass doors, and he never made it beyond the first one. He never went inside, but he got obstruction of an official proceeding, assault with a deadly or dangerous weapon, assault, parading, all the other misdemeanors, the little ones, trespassing and everything. He had like 11 charges, and he got convicted of 10 and a half of them.
When the FBI came to the house, did they offer him a lawyer, or was it all under the guise of a very friendly conversation?
I do not know. To be honest with you, he was arrested at his dad's. I wasn't there. The FBI came here. He had a public defender at some point who tried to get him out of jail in New York. But of course, they were like, no, he's a monster. We need to, society needs to be protected from him.
I read the transcripts from his that you sent me, and it was very interesting.
Sentencing?
Yes, for the sentencing. And it was very interesting to see how they skewed things to make him look a lot worse than what you're describing. Dr. Roots, you're on, aren't you? Is Dr. Roots on with us?
Yeah.
Welcome. We're so thrilled to have you.
Well, thank you. Actually, I just was listening to Eureka tell that story about Officer Daniel Hodges. I was actually in a trial representing another guy named Patrick Montgomery, who was also accused of assaulting that same cop, Daniel Hodges. And of course, for those of you who don't know, that Daniel Hodges has become a celebrity. He goes around and I think he testified in Colorado to have Trump declared an insurrectionist and have him removed from the ballot. And I believe that Daniel Hodges goes around and he gives interviews. He gives inconsistent stories. He changes his stories constantly. And I was in the courtroom once when he came and just gave false statements saying that he never swung his baton at anyone on January 6th. And we have video of Officer Hodges swinging his baton all very wildly, and many people reacted to that. That Officer Daniel Hodges is he was acting crazy all day long. And he's gone on to be this big celebrity for the liberals and the Democrats. Yeah. But he's no hero at all.
Well, the plot thickens, doesn't it? It thickens. Dr. Roots, could you explain how you got involved and what you're doing right now to help our J6ers?
Well, it's funny. I've actually had 14 trials. I've been representing January 6 defendants. I've had 14 separate January 6 trials, 10 of which were jury trials. And so I've probably in the last 2 years written hundreds of motions, briefs. I've written so much legal work in addition to these trials. And right now, of course, I'm working on appeals because a lot of the action has moved to the end of these cases, which is appeals. So I'm working around the clock on writing appeal briefs right now. And it's funny because, we've all been expressing how much we know and how much we don't know, the pipe bombs and all these other mysteries. And I can tell you as a lawyer right on the front lines, there's a lot I don't know. We were never allowed to get to the bottom of the story. We're never allowed to ask certain questions. We're never allowed to get the answers. And I could tell you the government files motions and objections even before the trials begin to prohibit us and to preclude us from asking certain questions. And so we are never allowed to ask the real questions that matter. And January 6th will go down in history as one of the blackest stains on criminal justice. It's just what has been done to the defendants is horrific. They've all been over prosecuted. They've all been over sentenced. Never before in American history have political protesters been treated this way. Usually, we've had so many riots over the years, but never have political demonstrators been so severely harshly treated.
Roger, when we take a look at a bias of some of the judges, such as Judge McFadden, who was the judge for Patrick, we begin to see what kind of bias there was, because he was likening it to a high school book called The Crucible, and making it sound like this Daniel was being crushed like the character of the book. And we know that in some ways, if you look at the video, that Patrick was trying to protect in some way some of the officer from not getting crushed. And we saw the same thing with Luke trying to protect. And they take that protection and they're using it against them. And we've seen that with women who, a woman who raised tried to lift up a post that had fallen over, and they said they arrested her because they said they were using it as a weapon. So we even have judges that are biased in this.
Yeah, it's funny. I won't say anything about any specific judge because I can get in trouble for that. But I'll just say that the judges have overwhelmingly sided with the prosecutors in all these questions. They've ruled in favor of the prosecution and against the defendants almost in every instance. And it really is a shame. These January 6 defendants they've never had a fair chance of fair proceedings.
It's so true. Eureka, you were telling me that Patrick has never been in trouble before. How is he doing now, and what's going on, and what's your hope for January 20th?
Well, I hope, of course, that he gets out. I mean, he hopes so too. But I think we are all scarred by it. You know, I mean, twice he was basically ripped out of his life. First the arrest, then at conviction, he was remanded because he's such a danger to society. This is the boy who uses a turn signal pulling into the driveway on a one-way lane. You know, I mean, it's hard for me to envision. People who know him, you know, all the neighbors were very supportive. Okay. It's the hysteria around it that scares me. And I'm scared again that people will say, well, he got pardoned or clemency or whatever. I mean, he has been in prison and jails in various horrible situations for the last 3 years. You know, we have lived with this. We have gotten threatening letters, phone calls, drive-bys. We have journalists at the doors. I've lost so much of my privacy for the last 4 years. So nobody got away scot-free here. Yeah. You know, he hasn't worked, he hasn't socialized. You know, the judge said, oh yeah, you will be still young, you'll be in your early 30s when you get released. I mean, you know, yeah, he loses 10 years. I mean, nobody gets for assault 7.5 years in this country, aside when you're accused of a January 6th thing. And the other thing that I find astonishing is that I was trying to do some research about riot shields and other cases, and I cannot get on it. Whereas January 6th, all the information is public. The DOJ has a website. You can look by name. You can search for things. There's no privacy anymore. Yeah. And since when Patrick was in a trial with 2 others, he didn't know those people. He met them in the courtroom. In the beginning, there were 11 of them. And all they had in common, they were on January 6th in the area of the West Tunnel. And that qualified them as co-defendants. You know, the judge got Patrick mixed up with the other defendants. You know, I mean, he had 3 of them and he couldn't figure out who was who. How is this justice?
There is no justice. There is no justice. I'm gonna transition here. And is Mary on yet? Is she on? Okay. Mary, it's good to have you on the show. I had you on my podcast when I was running for Congress, and we've stayed in touch. I've stayed in touch with your son, Isaac, and been praying for him very regularly. How are you doing? How's Isaac? Briefly tell Isaac's story and how he's doing, and then we're going to meet Carrie.
All right. Well, thank you for having all 3 of us on.
Thank you.
It's good to meet all of you, and it's good to see Eureka. I've met Eureka. We've met online, but then we physically met at the prison in the visitor line. So that was pretty neat. And then Carrie, she and I have talked on the phone a lot, and her husband and my son work out almost every day together at the prison. Yes, I saw Isaac over Christmas, and he's doing well. And he said, I want to come out a better man than when I went in.
And he tries that.
Yes.
Take note of that, Toni. That's a good one. That could be a whole
Yes.
show.
Yes, and he said sometimes when other J6ers come in, they're discouraged, and it's shocking to be in a prison when you have no criminal record. And he said he tries to encourage them to do the same thing. You know, let's stay busy, try to stay scheduled, stay disciplined, and try to come out better than you go in.
So good.
And he and I had, and my husband and other family members had been to a variety of Trump rallies previous to January 6th. And Isaac runs a landscaping business in the wintertime, or in the summertime, and in the winter he travels, and sometimes he'll hunt in Africa. And he was in Florida at the time in January, and he gave us a call. He said, I just heard about the rally in DC. I think I'm going to go. So it was kind of spur of the moment. And he did go to the rally, and he enjoyed it so much. It was just immense and very historic. He walked over to the Capitol. He never went inside the building, but he walked down the sidewalks outside and walked up a set of steps. And there was a barricade at the top with police officers standing there. I don't think there were a lot of police officers at that time when he first came upon it, but he visited with police officers, told them how he appreciated them, and the crowd behind him began to build. And there were some people in the crowd who were cursing at the police officers. And on the body cam, you can see Isaac look at some of those fellows and just turn away and shake his head, like, what are they doing here? And there was someone on a bullhorn hollering things, and eventually the barricade was pushed down on the crowd, and Isaac was right at the top step. So he had to grab that barricade also because they were going to push everybody down the steps. And there were people, I think, getting ready to push it toward the police too. So that pushed them all down the steps. And later he told me he was injured in his shoulder, but he just worked it out. And then he went back to Florida, where he was re-upping his skydiving license. Then he went to Africa for a hunt with one of his friends. And he also has a daughter over in Africa. And he was in Kenya visiting friends en route to see his newborn daughter. She was only a few months old. And the FBI sent the Kenyan police to his motel to raid it. And I think he may be the only person that was arrested overseas. I'm not sure.
Did they consider him a flight risk? Is that why the Kenyan police came in?
I think so. Although the government knew that he already had a return ticket scheduled for, I believe it was April.
Maybe Dr. Roots would have some interjection here. What do you think about that situation, Dr. Roots? Have you heard of it before?
I'd say, wow, this is the first I've heard of this. Wow, amazing. It's just astounding the resources that the taxpayers have been made to spend on these ridiculous prosecutions. When, listen, there have been so many riots in American history. We've never punished political demonstrators in this way before. These are the harshest sentences in American history for political demonstrating. And I can remember being in law school where they taught us about the case of Eugene V. Debs back in World War I, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison for giving speeches against World War I. Sentenced to 10 years in prison. And in law school, they taught us that was one of the worst injustices in American court history. And these January 6 cases make those cases pale in comparison. I mean, these sentences that are being handed out against the January 6ers are far more severe than anything in American history. So we are living in the darkest times. People don't realize this right now is the most extreme injustice in the court history of the United States. It's just a dark spot on American history, and it will go down as just a black shame on American justice.
I agree. And everything that they have done to our president, Donald J. Trump, and his lawyers and anybody that surrounds him have just been annihilated by this government and our administration. It is sad. Go ahead, Mary, continue, and then we're going to meet Carrie.
All right. So yes, they handcuffed him after they went through everything in his luggage and his motel room, and they drove him about 8 hours to Nairobi. Oh, so it was an overnight trip in the back seat of the police car, I guess. And then they flew him back home, but I believe that he was not handcuffed on the flights, but he said it was pretty obvious there were FBI agents flying with him. However, they never acknowledged it. But when he entered the airport in New York City, they immediately took him, handcuffed him in the airport, kind of like Peter Navarro, and took him and put him into jail in Brooklyn. And it was they slapped a $250,000 bond on him because they thought he was a flight risk. And he said he wished that he could talk to the attorney who was appointed to him just in the Brooklyn district. That she was only there for him for that situation, but she fought for him, and she told the judge he is not a flight risk. He's done this. He does this every winter. He's done it for 3 winters in a row now, and what they did was they got a hold of my husband and myself, and thankfully I had a free period at the middle school where I was working, and myself and my husband and about 8 other friends and family members got on a conference call with the judge, and our friends and our family put up their homes and our home as collateral for this $250,000 bond.
Wow, you really know who your friends are when things like that happens.
It just made me cry. I did a lot of crying the first year and a half of this.
Yeah.
But it was amazing. It was a miracle. And the judge, when he talked to each one of them and said, how much do you make? How much do you make? Each different person. And it wasn't very much. I think it impressed him. And he did release Isaac the next day with an ankle bracelet. And fast forward to the trial in 2023, where the sleeping Judge Royce Lamberth found him guilty on all counts. I believe it was 3 felonies, 4 misdemeanors. I think they dismissed 1 misdemeanor. And they even had a police officer up on the stand, and they were trying to get him to say that Isaac assaulted him, and he couldn't even remember who Isaac was. And finally, they got him to say, well, maybe we brushed shoulders for a moment. I don't know. And the judge, well, he wakes up and says that's assault on a police officer.
Dr. Roots, do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, it's astounding. She's absolutely right. People have been January 6ers have been convicted of assaulting an officer for brushing a shoulder against a police shield. There's a guy who's Christopher Worrell, a member of the Proud Boys, held up a tiny little capsule of pepper spray, and the kind that you can buy over the counter at 7-Eleven. Sprayed 1 or 2 pumps of this tiny capsule of pepper spray, which again is designed to maybe stop a dog from barking or something. And on the basis of that was convicted of assaulting an officer with a deadly weapon and is now doing 10 years in federal prison. I've had a client, his name is Joe Thomas, and he, just like what she just described, brushed his shoulder against some police shields. He was charged with 5 counts of assaulting officers, for basically throwing his elbow out here or there. It was crowd chaos essentially, and convicted of 4 counts of assaulting officers. I had another client, his name was John George Todd, holding up a tiny little American flag with a fiberglass stick, a fiberglass flagpole. There was a cop that grabbed it and tried to pull it out of his hand. The fiberglass stick broke, and the cop cut his finger on the fiberglass. And my client is now doing 5 years in federal prison for assaulting an officer, causing bodily injury.
Wow.
And yet we turn that around and we see what the police officer did to Ashley Babbitt and then was praised for it. Mm-hmm. And they killed her as she was coming through a window, unarmed.
Yeah.
So, Mary, tell us how long Isaac's sentence is and what is your hope for January 20th?
Yes, they sentenced him. The expectation from the public defender was that they would ask for 5 years and he would get 3. But just a day before the sentencing, prosecution asked for 11 years, and they sentenced him to 7 years.
And wasn't he
And
offered a plea deal?
yes, he was. And he refused it. He said, I cannot with integrity admit to something I didn't do.
Good for
Now, I
him.
understand, and he's my hero for that. And I understand, some families, husbands with children and businesses, I get that they might take a plea deal. The government puts extreme pressure on people, and just it's terrifying to see the possibilities if you don't take a plea deal. And I'm thankful for Isaac. He prepared us. He told my husband and I, he said, I'm not going to take a plea deal. I just want you to know that ahead of time. And so he went into the Elkton federal prison in Lisbon, Ohio, just a year ago on January 4th.
Wow. I remember
And
that day very well. You wrote me. I think you wrote everybody.
yes.
Yeah, to pray. Yeah.
And I do have expectations for January 20th. I'm praying for President Trump, praying for the people surrounding him. It just seems to me that a blanket pardon of innocence is what we need, because there's so many people charged with assault. I hear people say, well, just the nonviolent ones. Some people had no choice, and some people were falsely charged.
Mm-hmm.
How do you sort through all of that? I think everyone has suffered enough.
I pray for restitution too, that these people, Isaac's job, he was building a home, all the things that he's lost. And I know as Carrie tells her story with Luke, they've got 8 kids and he was the main bread earner. And then Patrick as well, that I hope that we give our J6ers restitution for what we've put them through as a nation. It's criminal. Dr. Roots, do you have any things to say on the hope for January 20th before I introduce Carrie?
Well, I you can count me in. I'm hoping that President Trump will just issue a blanket pardon of every single January 6er. And I say that, of course, some of them weren't perfect.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't behave perfectly on January 6th, but they've never had a fair chance to really defend themselves because that venue in D.C. is so hostile. The jury pool in D.C. is, it depends on the year and the election, but it's over 90% Democrat. And by the way, that doesn't mean that the other 10% are pro-Trump. There's a few Republicans in D.C., but they are the anti-Trump Republicans. So it is a hostile jury pool. They never stood a chance. Those cases all should have been moved outside to other fair locations. So none of them ever had a chance to defend themselves. Trump should really just pardon every single one of them.
I agree. So I'm very happy to introduce Carrie Hoffman. Carrie and I had quite a long conversation on the phone. Her baby was taking a nap at the time, so she was free to talk. And I really enjoyed it, Carrie, and I love the pictures of your family and your husband, Luke. Can you tell us what happened on that day? You were there with your husband, Luke, as I recall. Oh, she's talking, but we're not hearing her. Is she muted? Hold on, Carrie. We'll fix it.
She's unmuted. She's muted on her end.
Oh, Carrie, you're muted on your end. You have to unmute. Can you unmute? Because we need to hear you. There's a button on your. Do you think she knows can she hear me?
Yeah, she can. Yeah.
Okay.
No, she's all set. Technically speaking, she should be able to go.
Okay, so if you can unmute. If not, I'm going to go back to Dr. Roots and we'll just start talking. Let me know when you're ready, Carrie, okay? She will. Oh, there. I hear something. Is that you, Carrie?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, great.
Sorry, I was on my laptop and it's not working for some reason.
These things happen. We're thrilled to have you on, Carrie.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you were there with Luke and you almost didn't go. Tell that story.
Oh, yeah, we almost didn't go because just like a week prior, I had found out I was actually pregnant. And foolishly, I guess, I want to say foolishly because, what had happened, we just never thought anything like this would transpire. And we had already, booked our booked our room and our car. And, we're like, it'll be a safe event. We'll go. So we ended up going up to the Capitol the night before. We caught the tail end of President Trump's speech, and then we walked over to the Capitol, of course, and we were kind of towards the front. Very shortly after we got there, everybody's just protesting, and the police officers started, shooting people with rubber bullets or pepper balls. I'm still not sure which it was. Being tear gassed and pepper sprayed, and they were doing the percussion grenades, and we're right in the front row. As this, I'm sorry, I'm just very emotional today. It's just anyway.
It's a difficult day.
Carrie, it is okay. You have the right to be emotional. I'm just going to, in the name of Jesus, I just pray you calm Carrie's heart and allow her to speak. And if you're not ready, Carrie, we can go to Dr. Roots. Would you like to wait a little bit, or you want to continue?
No, I'm good.
I'm so grateful you're on. This is so important. Don't worry. Tears don't bother us.
It's just today has just been a very emotional day.
Well, let's tell our audience how many children you have.
I actually have 8 children.
And you look like a teenager. I don't know if my producer has put up the pictures of your family yet, but you're absolutely gorgeous, and your family is gorgeous. And
thank you.
And you've got a baby. How old is the baby? Is 4 months? Did you tell me?
Yeah, he's 5 months now. Judah's 5 months.
Okay, probably 4 when we talked. And then the one that you were pregnant with at J6 is how old?
She's 3. Okay. She turned 3 in August.
All right.
Beautiful family.
Your family is absolutely beautiful. Yes. And your husband, you talked about what a great dad he is and how much the kids miss him. And you can see by the pictures. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, he's a very good dad.
If you're ready to go on, let's go on.
Okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
It's it's traumatizing to go back to it because we never expected that to happen. Yeah. Like I said, I'm pregnant and I'm getting pepper sprayed and tear gassed, and it was just total terror. For lack of better words, it was just total terror. And even still to this day, I just finally brought myself to watch videos from then, just like a week or 2 ago, and that's it's been almost 4 years. And then it I don't know. I guess I have some PTSD or something, which I never knew was a real thing until now.
I understand.
But when all of that was happening, the crowd started pushing forward, and Luke was pushed away from me, and we were separated, and I couldn't find him. And I'm trying my best to work my way out, and I get up on one of the ledges, and I'm just like looking out into the crowd for him because I can't find him anywhere. And by that time, people had gone into the Capitol, and then I heard about that somebody had passed away, and I'm just terrified because it's just traumatizing. I don't know what's happening. They had shut off our phones, so we couldn't reach anybody. So after a short amount of time, I was able to find him, and he had gotten pushed to the tunnel, and I don't know for sure what happened there. I wasn't there, but I know what he told me happened. And I know that at one point in time that he had, a police officer was hitting him with a baton. He had just stepped in between them, and they tried to hit him with a baton. He just put his hands up to grab the baton, not to take it, but just, to stop the blow.
Right.
And, he got assault on officer charge for that.
Didn't you say at the beginning he was defending an officer and telling people that that's
in the very beginning, yes, before anything ever even happened, when the line of officers was there, there was 2 gentlemen who were pushing around an officer, and Luke told him stop, that's not what we're here for. Mm-hmm. Obviously, what transpired after that, and they'll never show the evidence of that because that's what, I kept telling him, like, you ask for body cam footage, and he's like, they're not going to give that to us. He can't even have his own evidence right now that they're using against him. So they're not going to give up any footage, anything that's going to potentially, show that that's not why we were there.
So I'm going to
You know, this
stop
is a
you there for just a second and ask Dr. Roots. Could you comment on that, Dr. Roots? Is that what's happening to your clients as well?
Absolutely. I can tell you that the rules of evidence have been applied so unfairly. The government, before every trial, files a motion to prohibit the defendant from arguing self defense, or arguing entrapment, or arguing the First Amendment. So they are prohibited before the trial even begins from mentioning the First Amendment, or arguing that they were entrapped, or arguing that they acted in self defense. All right. And the government also files motions to stop them from even mentioning police misconduct of any kind. Okay, so as these trials proceed, the government begins and they put on their case and they show all these scenes of violence. And they make the jury or the judge hear these audio tapes of these screaming cops, and these government officials afraid for their lives, and this big picture of how horrific and terrifying it was. And then they force the defendant to put on a defense that is so narrow that he can only talk about what he saw with his own eyes. He's not allowed to talk about in all these other issues that the government is allowed to talk about. Pipe bombs and all these mysterious players and mysterious actors, undercover informants, things that don't make any sense. Not allowed to even mention any of that. But the government can paint this broad picture of how violent and terrifying the story was. It really is just absolutely lopsided, one-sided, and unfair.
So, Carrie, there's some affirmation for you and what happened to Luke. You're not alone. Continue on with, thank you, Dr. Roots. Continue on, Carrie, with your story.
Well, that actually makes a lot of sense because the attorney that was hired in sentencing, the judge had asked some questions about, like, why was he in this particular situation, when he was at the tunnel, like, why was he there? And she just, like, totally did not answer the question. And it's in the beginning of the when we were going to the sentencing, and they say, are you happy with your attorney? And at that time I was questionable about it. But afterwards we were like, what just happened? Like, she did not defend him at all. She I'm sorry, I got off track, but yes, that's what he just said makes so much sense now as to why she didn't answer that, because why he grabbed that baton in that 2-second clip that they show, because of course they can't show the context to show what really was happening there. Mm-hmm. It was just very, very frustrating. But I did not know that, they were that, they were pushing down just this one little path and you weren't allowed to defend yourself whatsoever. I thought that was our attorney that was doing that. Not that was the rules.
Right. So tell us what happened that morning at 6:30 in the morning, and how many kids you had at your house. And
oh my goodness. So back in July of last year,
you left January 6th, not thinking a thing of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, we had seen we had seen some things happening on, when they were arresting people, and because we had gotten separated, and I asked Luke, like, is there anything that they're gonna? And he's like, absolutely not. Like, nothing they're coming after me for. Well, obviously we're wrong, but back in July of 2023, it was like 6:30, 7 o'clock, very early in the morning. I had gone out I actually had some puppies at the time, and I had gone out to let my female out so she could go to the bathroom. And I have my 2 males. I have Cane Corsos, and they were in my front yard, and they were just going berserk. And we live in the country. So I was just like, I'm looking, and I'm like, what are they barking at? Because we live, like, at the very end of a gravel road. And so I'm like, I don't see anything. So I go to let my dog out. And as I come back through the back side of my pasture, I see, just because it's kind of down a little hill, and I'm walking around and I see the top of a police car. And I'm like, what are the police doing here? And as I walk further in between the garage and my house, they have Luke in handcuffs. And there are just there had to be 20, 25, possibly even 30 FBI agents or police officers that were here, and they're just coming out with these huge guns from everywhere. And I'm asking them, I'm like, what is happening? Like, they won't tell me why they're here. And I'm going from like different officer to different officer, like, what is going on? So at one point I'm thinking like, okay, Luke must have been living a double life. He's killed somebody. Like, it's so over the top. Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
So you were wondering, this isn't the man I thought I married.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Because I'm just like, this, nothing makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, what is going on? This is like something you see in a movie where, you know,
And you said you didn't relate it to January 6th at all in your mind at that
No,
point.
not at all. Not at all. So this was during the summer, and I had my nieces and nephews over. So I had 12 sleeping children in my house that were woken with, by FBI agents with huge guns and made to go out in the middle of the summer and sit out in the hot garage for hours while they cried that they were, obviously they were scared, but they were hungry and they were hot and, traumatizing tons of children. And, it's very frustrating because it's like, if you were doing your job at all and you did any type of like, detective work, I guess, you would have known that there is a ton of children here and there would have been a better time to come or something. I don't know, but it's traumatized my whole household. And I can imagine that it's traumatized my nieces and nephews as well. But anyways, so, they sat out. I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm going to turn my phone on Do Not Disturb because my phone is going crazy.
People are telling you what a great job you're doing and how interesting this show is, I'm pretty sure.
It's actually one of my older daughters that's calling. So she's probably wondering why I'm not returning her texts. But anyway, when he came or when he was leaving, I guess they let him talk to my father-in-law who was here also, and they told him it was over January 6th, and I was just blown away because I was like, this can't be real. Like, this is just crazy. So they took him to the local police department, and luckily we did have a good, they gave us a court-appointed lawyer, Jeff Fishner, and he is amazing. He knows that Luke's a good guy, and, everyone who knows Luke knows he's a good guy. But he really fought against the government because they were trying to say like, oh, he's this bad person and he's a domestic terrorist. And, he came and he really fought for Luke, and the judge let him out on like his own recognizance. So we were very blessed in that aspect where he wasn't taken immediately and gone the whole time. So he initially had like 10 charges, and he didn't want to take a plea deal, but he ended up, they were telling him like, oh, if you take it to trial, we have a 98% conviction rate. You're going to get 56 years in prison. So obviously, when you have a house full of children.
He's the sole provider of your household is what you told me.
Right.
Correct? Yeah.
Yeah. Sole provider of the household. You got, I have 2 adult children, but I have 6 children in the home.
Yeah.
So he was like, I'm going to take the plea deal and hope that I can get back before my children are grown.
Mm-hmm.
So he ended up taking the plea deal, and he did get 20 months. And then he had 20 months. I think he had got 3 years of supervised release and then a $2,200 fine.
Wow. That's incredible. And so how long has he been in now?
He's only been in there for about 2.5 months.
Okay. Wow. So we're going to transition here back to Dr. Roots, but I want Toni to tell the story that it happened last night at a party, and I'd love for you, Dr. Roots, to respond to what possibly could have happened. And then if we have time, I would love if you women have questions for Dr. Roots that you could raise your hand so my producer could see it and you could ask him anything that you would like to as we end the show. But would you mind sharing your story from last night?
Absolutely. Well, briefly, there were 8 Rangers, Army Rangers, that were at the Capitol building. They actually had gone to hear President Trump at a place that they were supposed to go. And they had heard rumor that he was going to move eventually over to the Capitol steps. And so they were all going to wander over there. But when they got there to the Capitol steps, there actually was nothing. And in fact, there was really no action whatsoever. And their phones had stopped working completely. As one of the other guests had said, their phones went dead. So they stepped up onto the steps, nothing was going on, and all of a sudden one of the wives called and said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm on." So
she got through somehow?
All of a sudden, when he hit a certain level on the steps, the phones began to work and things started pinging and he could hear different calls coming in or different messages. And it was at that particular point that she said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm at the Capitol building on the steps." And she said, get out now. Everything's going crazy." He said, "I'm standing on the steps. There's nothing going on. There's no one around." And yet the media was already delivering the news of this mass hysteria on the Capitol building.
And you're going to try to get this guy on for a podcast, but I wanted to ask Dr. Roots, what does that mean? What do you think that means?
That's so interesting. It seemed like everyone has a different. There were thousands of people there, and almost everyone has a different story. The people on the west side, I think Eureka mentioned her son was in the tunnel. Now, that was a scene of a lot of pushing and shoving. A lot was going on there. So if you were there, you saw a lot of action, quote unquote. On the other hand, there were many areas of the Capitol where not much was going on. Everything was peaceful. Nobody was contacting anybody. Nobody was messing or touching anything. And so everyone has a different story, and of course the media and the congressional committee, the January 6th committee, was able to just take the parts of the video that make the January 6ers look the worst and splice them all together into these sequences. And if you look hard enough, you can find some pretty scary sequences. But by and large, most people, I've talked to people who went down on a bus from Massachusetts, went inside the Capitol, and walked out, got back in the bus and drove back, and then they saw videos of how chaotic and scary it was, and they were shocked. They hadn't seen any of that with their own eyes, and they had been inside the building. It is amazing, and Kerry talked about being threatened, being forced to take a plea deal, and that is so true. It's 100% correct. The vindictiveness of the prosecution has been so brutal. I've gone to trial 14 times, and the clients that I've had I would almost say they're crazy. They're the ones that absolutely refuse to plead guilty in the face of the most unbelievable threats by the prosecution. And what she said is absolutely correct. They will be offered, for example, to plead guilty to a misdemeanor and get up to 6 months in jail. But if they refuse, well, wham, they get hit with a 20-year felony charge all of a sudden, frequently right before a trial. So they think they're going in for a misdemeanor trial, and wham, all of a sudden they get hit with more felony charges, including these ridiculous assault charges where they might have brushed there were people that were laying on the ground, they got knocked down, and they reached up, a cop helped them to their feet. They get charged with assaulting the officer for grabbing the officer's sleeve or something while the officer was helping him up. It's that ridiculous, and it just goes to show the one-sidedness and how the government has just loaded these cases. It's just so abusive. She said it was a 98% conviction rate. It's actually they've had a 100% jury conviction rate, 100%. And we've had trials where we've won a few counts. So if a guy's charged with 10 counts, we might have won 3 counts, 2 counts, or whatever. But there's not been one defendant in a jury trial who has gotten completely acquitted. It is a 100% jury conviction rate. I think there have been a couple bench trials by the judges where a couple judges, maybe 2 or 3 cases, misdemeanors usually, have acquitted the defendants, and that's it. It is a
What are the odds of that?
It's never happened before.
No.
It doesn't happen in murder cases or rape cases, child abuse, child molestation cases. You'll never see a 100% jury conviction rate. It is so one-sided in these cases because the government has so many resources. They abuse the rules of evidence. Everything is rigged for the government's side. And they're in a hostile venue to begin with, where the jury pool absolutely hates the defendant's guts. They've done surveys, by the way. The jury pool in D.C. believe they are victims of the J6ers. So imagine a jury pool. Let's say someone is charged with rape, and he's going to trial, and the jury consists of nothing but rape victims. Just that's the kind of thing that is happening in this case. It's that outrageous. Trump could just, he needs to restore some balance and just pardon all these guys.
Is there any way in that pardon that they would be able to expunge the felonies or the misdemeanors from their records? Or are they stuck with that?
Okay, so my understanding is it's complicated, and it can vary a lot depending on the wording of what the president signs. So my understanding of this, if you are pardoned, if you're convicted of a felony and it's pardoned, then it will always be on your record, but you can, for example, you can possess firearms. The law, in other words, it's pardoned and it's forgiven, and for the sake of the law, you can always possess firearms, and you don't have to treat it as you don't have to walk around as a convicted felon for the rest of your life. Nonetheless, it's still on the books. It does not get expunged or erased.
So there was, going back to Toni's story, I remember there was a reporter that got fired because she announced on the news before anybody even went to the Capitol about the insurrection. It was announced before it ever happened. And that's what I was wondering about when I heard Toni's story is the news were prepped and ready to announce this big insurrection, and the people hadn't even gotten to the Capitol. Did you hear that, Dr. Roots?
Well, there's so much we don't know, and we're never allowed to get the answers. The pipe bomb story, for example, we've never gotten to the bottom of that. It was going to be a false flag operation of some kind. We don't know exactly, but it was an FBI setup where they were going to stage something. And a lot of people don't realize, but Kamala Harris, who was the vice president-elect, actually was there at the DNC, the Democratic National Committee building. She was a sitting U.S. senator, and she should have been in the Capitol. But for some odd reason that's never been explained, they took her to the DNC building to set up a false flag operation. We don't know exactly. Again, I don't know. I don't know what was going on. But it was obviously an FBI narrative of some kind.
And I hear she walked right by that pipe bomb.
Oh, yeah, and Secret Service would have obviously cleared it in advance. I mean, the story makes no sense whatsoever. And I can tell you, looking at so much discovery and video, there are players that have never been identified who broke the windows. There are players who took the scaffolding with megaphones and were yelling at everybody, go, go, come on, push forward. Never been identified, never arrested. So many strange things that we're never allowed to get the answers to. It's just so strange.
Well, thank you very much. We have come to the end of the show. I just want to tell each one of these beautiful women, Mary and Eureka and Carrie, your loved ones are in our prayers and our thoughts. I hope we stay in touch. I know I will with you, Mary, and can't wait to meet Isaac. But I really, Toni and I would love to stay in touch with you, and we will continue to pray for your families. And thank you so much for sharing your story. And Dr. Roots, what you've brought here today is really valuable. We so appreciate you being on the show. So at the bottom of our footnotes of our show, you can find where to give. We have links to help these families financially. If you would like to give, there's some funds to give to. And then we also have a website that is a work in progress. It's not very good right now, but it will be. But I want you to know how to get there. It's marytodd.net. You'll find all the shows on there. You'll find future shows. If we have, Toni and I have speaking engagements, our story is on there, both of our bios. So we'd love to have you maybe wait a few days to check out the website, but it is up and running. And so, Toni, thank you so much for being my co-host. Thank you for our team here that's helped so much today. My wonderful husband, Rick, is on the team, and Jim White, and we're so grateful. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.